We're live. Fellowship, I am very fortunate today and unblessed to welcome to the show the one and only Richard Carrier, PhD. Richard, how are you, buddy?
Hey, I'm doing all right tonight. Yeah.
Yeah? Cool. I don't know if you even remember, we engaged originally years ago about the Book of Mormon. I don't know if you remember this.
Give me some context, because I've done so many things. But yeah, if you give me context, I'll remember.
You had done several a run of shows about Jesus mythicism, all over the place. Of course, if those of you are unfortunate to not know, Richard's basically the foremost expert on Jesus mythicism alive today. Yeah. I mean, it's fair, especially now that now that Dr. Bob is pretty much like gone and gone. I mean, he's there. He's there.
But even that, like he's very erudite, but I've kept up with the latest stuff and the peer-reviewed literature and have done the peer-reviewed case for the historicity of Jesus. So yeah, certainly like he knows a lot more about the history of mythicism, whereas I'm like pretty much up to date on all the arguments that are current and the facts that are pertaining. So including the Ascension of Isaiah, which I think is going to be relevant later. So.
The Ascension of Isaiah, to be honest with you, is like one of my favorite texts, actually, and I learned about it because of you. And so, anyways,
nice.
Years ago, when I was getting into Jesus mythicism, yours was one of the videos, and that I found, of course, and you had made this comparison of drawing the historicity of Jesus to the historicity of the Book of Mormon, using the angel Moroni as and all this.
Yeah.
And I had sent you a quick email. I'm just forgive me for this, Richard. Just forgive me for this.
No,
as old friends. I'd sent you an email saying, listen, Dr. Carrier, I know you'll probably never see this or read this, but your comparison, your analysis about the Book of Mormon is so spot on this. For when the Mormons find you, the name is pronounced Moroni, not Moroni. I make it a point.
Right. Yeah. Very good.
And I make it a point never to make fun of anybody's pronunciation. The adage goes,
"Don't make fun of." Yeah,
right. It means that you read the name. I'm like, I'm just saying. I said, I'm just telling you.
And I've said it right ever since. So
good. I've just since then I've said, because that's the shit the Mormons will not
even
let
got,
you go.
The reader for the audiobook for Jesus from Outer Space, which is the only book I've written that doesn't have audio, and it's been years. But I just never was able to find time to do the audio myself, and I don't have a way to set up studio and things like that. So I got someone who's good at it and has the tech to do a read, and so it's narrated. It's in the can. I'm reviewing the files. I'm halfway through them. So that audiobook is definitely coming out this year. Finally, Jesus from Outer Space will have audiobook. But yeah, Moroni comes up in there. So that makes sure that pronunciation is correct from the reader. And and so people who are watching who don't know is that the analogy I draw, similar also to the angel Gabriel to Muhammad, which is that people forget that the actual founders of these religions are mythical people, right? So Joseph Smith just follows instructions, hears stories from a Moroni. He gets everything from Moroni. So Moroni is really the founder of Mormonism, right? And Gabriel is and Muhammad supposedly dictated the words of Gabriel, the angel, and that's what the Quran. So the Quran is really the words of Gabriel. So the founder is really Gabriel. And these people don't exist, right? There is no Moroni, there's no Gabriel. So my model is that's
how dare you?
Yeah. So my model is what if Christianity started that way? That Jesus Christ was one of these angels that people just claim to see in visions or whatever, and that's how it really began. And then later, the idea of making him a Galilean preacher was a later thing that was a common thing to do with revelatory beings back then. So all the savior gods that were celestial gods got converted into historical people, even though they never were really. So in context, that makes sense. And so then you see so the founder really is Peter, right? He's the Joseph Smith, he's the Muhammad of Christianity, and Jesus is the Moroni or the Gabriel. And so that was the analogy. So for people who are caught up now, if want to understand where we're coming from with this. And so, yeah.
Cool. I mean, basically, that's what Jesus from Outer Space is about, as I understand it. I haven't read it yet.
Correct. Yeah, it is.
So I'm looking forward to the audiobook.
And actually listening back, hearing it, because I would have to listen to the files. Hearing it again, I'm actually quite happy with the book. Like it's there's some things that I've changed my mind about since, but minor trivial things. And no, it's a good, easy summary of why I've come to the conclusion that I do and why I think other people should as well. But if you like, you say like you think like this is just a summary, it's colloquial, there's no footnotes, there's no citations, etc. If you want the full, proper, peer-reviewed academic case, I have that, and that was first, and that was on the Historicity of Jesus, which is this massive tome, which is useful for people, even if you don't believe in, even if you're not a mythicist, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if you agree with the conclusion of the book. You will find tons of useful stuff in that book for understanding the origins of Christianity, because I go into so much background knowledge and literary analysis and things like that. So it's a useful book for people, even regardless. But Jesus from Outer Space is the best, like, quick summary of it. And it works. I feel like it's easy to follow, and I'm explaining things well. So I'm happy with it in review now that I'm hearing it back, spoken to me, basically.
Good. Well, I'll tell you, man, I loved on the Historicity of Jesus, even if it was a little bit like, whoa, like drinking from a fire hose in terms of information.
Yes.
But it was amazing. So let's just review, because we're about to watch Ward Radio together. And those of you at home who don't know, this is one of my favorite hate watches. Richard's never even heard of them. And you're going to love it.
First for me. Yeah.
So Ward Radio is basically Mormon Howard Stern, but where everyone is Howard and nobody is Robin. So it's just like everybody gets loud, everybody's upset, everybody's offended, and the more offended they get, the more they shout over each other. So you're going to have to, in the moments where you want to interject with anything, you're going to have to get loud, Richard. Just say, wait, stop, right?
Gotcha.
So
yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, I'll wave my hands.
For those of you who don't know,
Right,
Dr. Carrier is a Columbia-educated historian. He's got readers from all over the world, from Hong Kong to Poland. He has a PhD in ancient history, and he specializes in modern philosophy of naturalism and humanism and the origins of Christianity and the intellectual history of Greece and Rome. One of my favorite things about Richard is that he actually has written books about like Roman science education and Roman history. And it's like, this is like really good literature. And just so we cover it, just to get a preview on this Jesus mythicism. Okay. Jesus mythicism has been bad in the past. It has been bad scholarship from time to time. As a matter of fact, most of history.
Yeah, I would say. Yeah.
Right. And so
absolutely.
Right now, really what it is, the modern form of Jesus mythicism, which I consider myself a mythicist, is that we consider it plausible that Jesus, the story of Jesus Christ or Jesus of Nazareth, started with a myth instead of with a man. And that's it. And if any book had proven it, it would have been on the Historicity of Jesus by Richard. But even there, you don't claim that it's proven that Jesus was a myth.
Yeah, we don't have a smoking gun. The evidence is too compromised, too weak, too scrabbly. Like there's too little evidence to reconstruct the actual origins of Christianity. So we have to Sherlock Holmes it from the evidence, and so it's always very little wishy-washy. So even my upper margin of error is 1 in 3 chance that there was a Jesus, right? A historical guy, and I have actually like outlined plausible models of the origins of Christianity involving a historical Jesus. And one of my more popular speeches is about this, which is You're All Gonna Die, which was the title of it, which was a talk I gave at Wichita when the day the world was supposed to end, according to Harold Camping, right? So you can go Google Richard Carrier, You're All Gonna Die, Wichita, and you'll find that talk. And it's a fun talk, a lot of humor in it, but it is actually, it's kidding on the square, because it's like I'm actually building a plausible theory of how Christianity actually began with a historical Jesus. So I don't think that's implausible at all. I just think that the evidence tips in the direction of the other model, that Jesus started as a revelatory being that the people only met in visions and dreams or whatever. And the idea of putting him in history was just a literary device that was very common for savior cults back then. And then, of course, the church that took over was a historicist. Like they took the myth literally and browbeat and shunned and exiled anyone who would question it. And then, of course, they got the government, basically got the Roman Empire's version of Donald Trump to back them. And then what do you get is, Constantine, Council of Nicaea, and everybody else is like dead or kicked out, right? So and then they're controlling all preservation of records. So that's why we don't get to read the stories of the actual books of the opponents of the successors. So anyway, that's that required no conspiracy. That was all out in the open, right? Like you could just see it, like they're saying it. It's there, and we know what books are missing. We know what we don't get to read, and we know who was in charge of deciding that, and it was medieval Christians. So so that's the thing. It makes sense in context. And I think that's what people have to get into, really dig into the context to understand it.
Yeah, I love it. Cool. So we're gonna hate watch Word Radio, and I'm so looking forward to this.
Let's do this.
So basically, those of you who don't know, that this first clip, we're gonna watch a bit of this, and then if it gets boring, we're gonna jump to the really interesting stuff. One of the people you're about to see on here has written a book. His name is Jonah Barnes, and he's a Mormon apologist. To the best of my knowledge, he's an armchair historian. So fine.
Okay, yeah.
I am also. So no, don't at me, Jonah. But I got like a real historian here, so I don't know what to tell you other than that. Although you're gonna love what he has to say about people with PhDs. Anyways, so they responded about Wes Huff. Now, Wes Huff in the Exmo world is like almost nothing. It's like I didn't even know who this guy was before he went on Joe Rogan. But in the evangelical
nobody did.
world,
This was the thing. Like he was very unknown. But go on. Yeah.
Okay. And so he basically he had taken down this other Christian apologist in a debate fairly soundly. It's obvious the guy he was debating with didn't really know any history, really significant history at all.
Yeah.
And he does appear to be an educated historian, though he is also very much an apologist. Goes on Joe Rogan to talk about Jesus. Well, everybody and their dog is making videos reacting to Wes Huff. I understand maybe there's one from Richard coming out in the future. But what nobody has been paying much attention to is that when Wes Huff went on Joe Rogan, he also talked about Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon and the Bible, and for all of like 10, 15 minutes maybe. And before this, Ward Radio had been making lovely little reactions to how wonderful it is that we finally have an apologist who will go to give it to the Christians and to the evangelicals and everything, until he had a commentary about Joseph Smith. So this first clip, I just grant you, it's cobbled together. So we're just gonna do our best with it.
I assume like for everybody else, the links are in the description or something like that.
That's a great point.
Folks who want to check this out.
Maybe.
I mean, obviously, I'm not going to check it out while we're doing it, but at some point, they might want to have the links.
You people in the future, yes, they're absolutely in the links.
That's right. Yeah,
the links are in the description.
Yeah. Well, we'll see the clip, and I guess that'll have the title that they could Google it or something, right? So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you'll see something. People who know Word Radio. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Of Isaiah was not included in the canon for reasons that will become quite clear as we talk about it. But honestly, I'll say that if there is a single apocryphal book that members of the Church of Jesus Christ,
this is the wrong clip. Hold on.
I know where he was going. Let's go back. Yeah. I haven't even seen it.
Oh yeah. What he was saying. Let's see here. Oh no. Oh, because I exported the whole thing. Okay. I'm going to add this to the stage.
Read, it's the Ascension of Isaiah.
I'm going to fast forward to it. Oh my gosh. I'm so embarrassed that I did that. Okay, here we go. Yeah, so this is the part where they go after. Okay, there's our Wes Huff. Okay, here we go. let's just go wild.
Dishonest for so long, so unethical for so long, and has repeated ad nauseum for so long, the same lie doesn't mean it's real. And you should know this if you say you are a trained historian, as you do in all of your content, because I have been following Wes Huff carefully. This is actually a little bit heartbreaking for me, because I was really excited to see a new, young, fresh-faced apologist that seemed really, really into the ancient manuscripts just as much as Jonah Barnes was. I've probably watched about 10 hours of this guy's content in the past week, and we've even recorded some other videos about him, me and Kwaku, that have yet to be released in the wake of him debating Billy Carson, which I thought were really interesting. And now I call into question all of the conclusions he's made about the authenticity of the Bible and the manuscripts, because I know that he is unethically approaching Joseph Smith and the King Follett discourse. How do I know he's not unethically approaching, I don't know, the Gospel of Thomas, the Shepherd of Hermas, the Didache? You know, I'm.
It's Didache, by the way.
What's that?
It's Didache.
Oh, Didache. Oh, yeah.
I know it spells in the way that looks like a French word, Didache, but it's actually the Greek. It's Didache. But anyway,
man.
So
Cool.
He's lost my trust. I don't care if you believe.
Oh, no. That's what it took. This is Cardinellis here. He's the guy who hosts the show.
Well, it's all identity politics, right? Like, as soon as you attack my religion, now you're evil and everything you're saying is a lie. But yeah.
That's right. Now you're not such a good historian. Now that you're against my history, now that you know my history, you're not.
The revelations of Joseph Smith. Don't say you're an expert if you're just recycling tropes. That's not expert behavior. That is ignorant and uninformed behavior. Also, don't say you're a Christian if you're going to use tribal smears.
Because everyone knows
tribal smears.
Yeah, tribal smears is a totally foreign thing to Christianity. No Christians ever did any of that.
Right, I don't understand. That was a weird one. Does he get into what he says the false trope is that he's talking about?
So yes, I cut it out because it was just too much, and I want to get to the Ascension of Isaiah. But
you could summarize.
Basically, they brought up the fact that that Wes Huff had mentioned that Joseph Smith believed and taught in the King Follett sermon. I say King Follett sermon, guys. The Ward Radio, they don't like that I say that we pronounce it that way. That's the way I've always pronounced it, so I do. That Joseph Smith and King Follett sermon is basically where this idea that when you die and you're a good little Mormon boy, you get to become a god and have your own worlds.
Correct.
And so they're saying basically that never happened, which is some interesting revisionist history. Mormons
so they're
are
saying that that's not a Mormon teaching,
that's right.
Mormon does not rule his own planet. But
correct.
Isn't that a question of like, doesn't the prophet, like the living prophet today, like what they have an opinion on this? Like, what does the church say?
So the church is actually doing its own revisionist history. It's more about what the church stops saying now. It's like the church
right.
It's
like Scientology. They're like revising. It's like what Xenu? No, it wasn't Xenu.
No, we don't know anything about no Xenu.
That's ridiculous.
I've been a Scientologist these many years. Right? Yeah.
Right. Oh no! So I was not aware of this. I didn't know that there was a revisionist movement within Mormonism. They're trying to get rid of this doctrine.
They're trying to get rid of some things while trying to embrace other things as it gets trickier for them. So one of the things, for example, is they came out with a photograph of the seer stone, the chocolate-colored seer stone or peep stone that Joseph Smith put in the hat to translate the scriptures. Prior to that, when I grew up, that was anti-Mormon lies, And so, anyways, now they're coming around. As a matter of fact, and now they even have Mormons who actually think that the current prophet is like basically a fallen prophet for admitting that that's how it happened. That's one of the ways.
Oh wow! Yeah. Okay.
Trials, not a single German admitted, yes, I was anti-Semitic. Meanwhile, we've got 6 million bodies unaccounted for. Oh yeah, it couldn't all be.
I'm going to skip ahead of this. Basically, he goes on this.
Especially because that's not true. The Nazis were openly anti-Semitic. They're like, yes, kill the Jews. We hate the Jews. The Jews are responsible for everything. So absolutely, they admitted they were anti-Semitic. Although I understand the point. The point he's trying to make is that the racists will try to deny they're racist We know that's true. It's just Nazis are a bad example because they were openly racist. That was the whole thing. It's like, mask off. No, we're racist. Read Mein Kampf.
Exactly. Well, here's the thing: is that he's basically going to come around to saying basically that's why you don't get, for the same reason you don't have anti-Semites admitting that they're anti-Semites. Anti-Mormons don't ever admit that they're anti-Mormons, and basically drawing a corollary there. And it's like, wow, okay, guy.
Except isn't Huff by definition anti-Mormon because he's evangelical?
Yes.
He's not a Mormon. So obviously he thinks Mormons are heretics going to hell. Like I don't.
Correct. And that's what he's trying to say now. Now that he's lost it, now that he's lost Cardinals' trust, boy, he's gonna have nothing but regrets. Poor Wes.
Yeah. Well, in the sense that
the Mormon one is the craziest one.
Yeah,
because we know who wrote it. You know, and he's a shady dude.
He is a shady dude.
It's not crazy if we have no frickin' clue who wrote it. Yeah, that's perfectly. Let's believe in a book we have no dang clue who wrote. But if we know who wrote it, that's just crazy.
But Wes Huff, don't you dare decry the atheists do it to you.
Boy. Oh, yeah.
Don't you dare decry the atheists do it to you if it's exactly what you do to members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Book of Mormon trumps the Bible. So they would believe, I think it's the 10th article of the Mormon Church, is that they believe the Bible insofar as it is translated. And so they...
No!
Wrong about everything.
What does it mean to believe the Bible insofar as it is translated? I don't even know what that sentence means.
We don't believe the stuff that remains in original Koine Greek. That stuff we don't believe.
So look, we believe the Bible to be the word of God as long as it is translated correctly. And they love mocking this. They take this small, obscure phrase that doesn't really... I don't want to say doesn't matter, but they take this small obscure phrase and they try and blow it out of proportion to something it's not. We believe the Bible to be the word of God as long as it is translated correctly because we recognize translation matters. And then these people want to mock it, saying that that's some kind of gaffe, and then do their dissertation on a 15th translation of the Bible. Listen to these guys. Ask them, what's the best translation? Oh, NKJV, NIV, ESV.
Okay, so just
I get it. That's a fair criticism because the evangelicals are the same way, especially the ones that are KJV only. Like there's some hardcore non-Mormon Christians who are hardcore about this, right?
The Mormons are very much on the KJV. That the KJV is the closest thing.
And there are evangelicals taking that position too. Yeah. Oh man, I just did a blog recently, like a few months ago. I don't remember which one it was, but it was on there have been these like apocalyptic, ultra conservative Christians doing these things. And I've done a couple blogs on them, and they're awash with these videos about how the King James is inspired, and you can't rely on any other English translation. The King James, the original, not even the new King James, the original King James, like it is the only reliable translation. All the others are bullshit, and they're like corrupted by woke or whatever. And that's a thing. So it's funny seeing them eat each other over the shared doctrines.
Because it's actually, this is the thing that's interesting about this, is that they don't make a bad point here. I mean, it's true that if the Bible's true, if the gospel stories are true, it's as far as they are translated. More importantly, it is what's in the Koine Greek. If it's in anything, it's the Koine. That's the Greek. That's the truth. So, anyways.
That's actually one of his big thrusts, is like talking about the different Bible translations and comparing them and how they work and all that kind of stuff.
Isn't that what his PhD is in?
It seems to be something along those lines. That's like all his infographics or that kind of stuff. Yeah. Joseph Smith was actually at the forefront of this idea that the Bible doesn't come exactly word for word perfectly.
Bet you didn't know that, Richard Carrier. Bet you didn't know that.
What? So wait, what is he trying to claim that
there's different? He didn't explicitly say this, but kind of these new ideas that were coming out of, there's different manuscripts, there's different translations, and the newer idea of the Bible that's more of the modern way that even Orthodox Christians see it today.
How about this?
So basically, he's making the claim that 1829, 1830, when Joseph Smith comes out with the Book of Mormon, founds the Church of Christ, that's among the first wave of people who actually gave any kind of critical analysis to the way translations go. So yeah.
So the Dewey-Rames King James debate never existed before this. Yeah, right. Okay.
So he says he talks about how a very popular Mormon historian and a pretty decent historian, Richard Bushman, claims that there were, quote unquote, a couple of Germans who had mentioned it before Joseph Smith.
Just a couple of Germans. Yeah,
just a couple of Germans.
As long as it's translated correctly. You can't decry the translation of the Jehovah's Witnesses, because what are you decrying? Oh, the fact that it's translated correctly. And then they always like coming back and saying, oh, yeah, but the Joseph Smith translation. Dude, look, that's at best a commentary, kind of similar to Wesley's commentary, all right? This was never canonized scripture.
Okay, so I don't know if the Mormon Church has changed its doctrine since I was kicked out of the church, but I just want to clarify for any Mormons who may have accidentally found their way in here. This is apostasy. You will be kicked out of the church for teaching it to other people. The Joseph Smith translation,
exactly.
the Joseph Smith translation is not canon. That it's not scripture.
Gotcha. Right.
By the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We never forced it to be read from the pulpit, okay? We reverence.
Okay, it's true that that they never forced anybody to read Joseph Smith's translation from the pulpit because they didn't own the copyright to it. So they had to actually get the reorganized church, which is called the Community of Christ Church, to give them license to use it in their scriptures and like the footnotes. So then all of a sudden the true Bible translation was the King James Version again, but with the footnotes.
Right.
So, but yeah.
Okay.
So we're gonna want to switch to the other one, to the more interesting thing here. But I'm hoping to have queued this up to Jonah Barnes talking about the more interesting thing here.
Translation of the Bible, and it's rough.
And when he was 14.
Okay, now he's leaning into Joseph Smith's translation.
Okay.
Well, I think it was later on that
there it was. He made his own translation of the Bible. Ooh, it's rough. My translation with my PhD is so much better. Again, they're referencing these commentary sections, and this is a misrepresentation of the facts. This is fake experts with fake news. And
he's going to show that he doesn't quite know what.
Okay, so I didn't know if you know this. Wait,
so now I'm curious about this. So, like, what is the Joseph Smith translation called?
It's called.
If you look at a list of Bible,
if you were to look at a list, it's called IV or Inspired Version. Basically,
I don't know that I've ever seen it. Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually brought it up to Bob Price in an episode of Myth Vision where I super chatted in years ago when Bob Price was still on Myth Vision. And Derek read it to him. Derek, who has, by the way, has been on my show. We had good things to say about you. We went live on Christmas. And if you guys don't know Myth Vision podcast, you got to check it out. So good. But Bob Price had said he never heard of it, or that he didn't know it well. And he's like, I think I might have a copy of it around here. So, yeah, it's pretty obscure, the Inspired Version. But basically,
I'm looking at all the lists. 'Cause I've done a lot of comparative. Like I look at you can do these concordances where you can look at like 20 different translations of one verse at the same time. And I've used a variety of resources to do that. And I don't think this has ever been on the list.
Yeah, no.
So I don't think I've ever seen it. So I'd be curious to know how bad it is.
This is not accepted canon anywhere except for in the Community of Christ and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I assure you. But it's interesting.
Okay. Yeah.
He's talking about in like 5 seconds here.
Okay, here we go.
And if we didn't know already.
Because he did 5 seconds ago. He's going to do it again, you mean?
Yes.
Every 5 seconds? He's going to do it?
This has been pointed out already. The Book of Moses has been in our canon for a long time, and that's kind of what sparked, or is a big part of the Bible, Joseph Smith Bible translation. By the way,
and they smoke a little.
Oh, here we go. I think this is it.
There's not even anything to compare it to. So what Cardin's saying is he's talking about like in John 1:1 when Joseph Smith. But the thing is, I looked around for this. I checked before we did this episode. There wasn't ever like a Joseph Smith saying, "Okay, now I've got like the revelation of what the first person actually wrote down. Joseph Smith actually went and changed his own revelations in the Doctrine and Covenants to what Jonah was saying. We don't have this. So the whole Latter-day Saint Church had this idea of we can always improve upon, not necessarily completely change, but always improve upon and see better ways to express the scripture that we have been given. And that's a lot of what he did with the Bible.
I feel bad.
What he did.
So, pause for a moment. I in reaction to this, I went and quickly checked John 1:1 and the JS. It's the JST, the Joseph Smith
translation.
So, yeah, it's terrible. To the point that I doubt that. Like, I wouldn't like say that he's quote unquote bad at Greek. I think he just doesn't care. Like, just for the way I'm reading it, he's just writing what he wants the text to have said. It's not like he's not making mistakes in Greek. He's just ignoring what the Greek says and making it say what he wants it to say. Which, of course, makes it a terrible. What's that?
He couldn't read Greek.
He couldn't read. Yeah, I don't know the history of that either.
Yeah, so basically,
so it looks like he's just basing it on. Yeah, he's like someone who looks at a couple English translations and says, "Well, I think I could come up with a better one." But he's not looking at the underlying Greek, so he doesn't even know how that works.
Right. And really, to be honest, he didn't claim to. Basically, he and Oliver Cowdery, translated the Book of Mormon from Reformed Egyptian on the plates. Sometimes when the plates were there.
They claimed it was inspired or whatever. Like they have like God somehow, the Holy Spirit instructed them and what the actual translation is.
Sure. Which would not be the strangest thing people have claimed, but yeah.
No, not at all. Yeah.
So there's a clip. I've lost it in the fast forward, but basically there's a clip. This guy down here at the bottom is who we're going to lean into.
Huff saying that the translation is rough is polite.
Polite.
Yeah, he was being easy on the Mormons. I'm sorry here. Okay,
what's a more accurate one?
No, it's completely useless.
Bullshit.
No, it's I mean, just from the first chapter of John, I'm looking at like this is completely wrong. Like it's not even remotely correct. Like that's what I say. Like he's not even paying attention to what the Greek is. He doesn't care. Like he's just making it say what he wants it to say.
Right.
So that's worse than a failed translation. I'll tell you, like a rough translation. There was and this is no criticism. So Zeba Crook did a synoptic version of the Gospels, where he did a translation where he followed the rule that each word would be translated exactly the same every time. So regardless of context, regardless of valence and everything, just brute, like same way every single time. And that is a rough translation. Like you read that, wow, that reads awkwardly, like it's, but he tells you up front that that's what he's doing, right? This is like, I'm just going to do it this way, make of it what you will, etc. But it allows someone who doesn't have access to the Greek to see what's going on. And of course, you do have to understand, like the valence has changed. So like sentences will come out awkwardly and won't sound right because context changes the meaning of words. But he, like I said, he admits he's doing that. But anyway, that's a rough translation. But at least he's respecting the Greek, right? Like he's actually trying to do it from the Greek using that strange procedure. So that version of the Bible does exist. It's not on any lists, but you can find
strange procedure of trying to actually translate it from the actual document.
Right, exactly. and that's what I call a strange procedure, but it at least respects the underlying text. Whereas, I'm looking at the Joseph Smith translation and it's not. So, so I think Huff is being nice. Like for Huff to call it rough, he's like implying that, well, he tried and just wasn't that great of a student of Greek. Like that's the impression I got from that statement. But no, it's not that. But
as you can see there, Richard, the narrative that it is basically just a commentary on the Bible. Bullshit. It's not anything like a commentary on the Bible. It was a failed attempt to translate. Now I'll say this in Joseph Smith's defense, and I won't do a lot of it.
I wouldn't call it a failed attempt. I think Joseph Smith wasn't even attempting. He wasn't even attempting to translate it. He's trying to tell you. He's trying to sell this as what the Bible said. So it's more of a con than a failure. Like he's not trying really hard and failing, right? No, he's deliberate. Everything he's done is deliberate. It's clear. You look at it. He wants this to be what it says, and he wants you to believe that's what it says.
Okay.
It's just he's
Fair
not
enough.
doing right. You know what I mean? Like he's not trying to translate and failing. He's just not. He's just chucked the whole idea of translating. Fuck that. And then God said this, and so here we go.
I will say this: Joseph Smith's concept of the word translate is loose. Like that sounds like a criticism.
Fair.
But it's actually true. I mean, like Joseph Smith talked about translation from different kinds of matter to different kinds of matter. He talked about, translation. He would use the word translate with a fairly loose context. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty clear what he's trying to do here, I think.
Yeah.
So, okay. So the important thing is this guy, Jonah Barnes, has written a book called The Key to the Keystone. And the key to the keystone is about the keystone to, Joseph Smith once said that the Book of Mormon is the keystone of our religion, and which is fair. That's about right. And so he's basically trying to say that some apocryphal texts tell us that the brass plates, which is the Old Testament that Lehi, the father of the family in the Book of Mormon that comes to America, one of the families, that the brass plates that contain the Old Testament in his time, that those are more or less preserved in the apocryphal writings, especially the writings of prophet Isaiah. And the Ascension of Isaiah is proof. And I heard that, Richard, and I perked right up because I went, wait a minute, did the Mormons discover mythicism? Because you're about to delve into some dangerous waters, sir. You're about to find out some interesting things about Christianity. So let's listen to a little bit of it, see what we get out of it.
Now, the Ascension of Isaiah was not included in the canon for reasons that will become quite clear as we talk about it. But honestly, I'll say that if there is a single apocryphal book that members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints should read, it's the Ascension of Isaiah.
Really?
I'd say it's the number one. It is. I love it. I think it's so good. It is a hybrid. It's pretty obvious there were several authors, but it's been kind of cobbled together. A lot of apocryphal books are like that, but I don't see that as any reason to be scared of it. I just care about the content. It's like with the Book of Mormon. People only want to talk about how it came to pass and want to actually read the stinking book. If you read the Ascension of Isaiah, you're like, this is great.
Okay, so let's dive in, dude.
There's a lot of evidence that.
So just so we're clear, Richard, don't get nitpicky. Don't go nitpicky about how it came to be. Just read it, baby.
Right. It doesn't matter if it's really two completely separate texts that got merged later. Doesn't matter if it said something else and the people changed it. Doesn't matter if people deleted whole sections. Doesn't matter if people added things that weren't in the original. Yeah, none of that stuff matters. Of course, I got it.
Yeah, cool.
It's true in the Book of Mormon. So. Okay. Nothing chafes those Christians like talking about Christ all the time. They just can't stand it because they believe that you can't talk about Christ before Christ, right? The pre-Jesus Christ, talk of the Messiah. It's too Messiah. It's too churchy. It's too Jesus fan in the Book of Mormon. Because remember, the Book of Mormon.
Often my criticism of Christianity is that they just hate anything all churchy and all Jesus fan.
I was confused by that statement. I was wondering if he was going somewhere with that, but okay.
Pulls from Old Testament traditions, right? Lehi.
There's nowhere to go. He's there.
and Nephi were living centuries before Jesus came. So when they're talking so clearly about a suffering Messiah, about the sonship of Jesus Christ and the Messiah, all these things, that is offensive because they say, we didn't have that. You can't talk about that. Early in the Book of Mormon, Lehi says, I'm preaching about the Messiah and they want to stone me to death. In 1 Nephi chapter 1, verse 18 and 19, he tells him Jerusalem's going to be destroyed. He says, your whole city's going to be destroyed. You're all wicked. You're all going to be annihilated. And they go, oh, go on. They don't even care.
Yeah.
They laugh at him. But then he says, and there's going to be a Messiah, and then they want to stone him to death. If you read it carefully.
Okay.
He says, the city's going to be destroyed. Yeah. And there's going to be this Messiah. And they're like, you can't say that. And they pick up stones to kill him. The story of the Ascension of Isaiah is exactly a prophet, one of the greatest prophets, who was killed exactly because he talked clearly about the Messiah. 550-ish BC is when most Bible scholars will agree that the Old Testament canon was kind of compiled.
Okay.
They get back from the Babylonian captivity, and the Jews all look around at the ruins of Jerusalem and they say, how could this happen? How could this happen? How do we explain this? And the scribes get together and they go, yeah, how did this happen? And I think the truth of it is the scribes are kind of why it happened. And so they're like, we got to come up with a story. Quick, mom's coming home. I was with you all night. I was with you all night, right? And so they come up and they compile the Old Testament to say the real reason that we were all destroyed was because we didn't listen to the scribes enough. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, we weren't scribe enough. And they kind of recast the God of Israel in their own image. Now, Isaiah lived in the...
I'm a little confused. So I don't know a whole lot. I'm not as immersed in Mormon detail, Mormon scriptures as much. So as I understand it, Lehi, I mean, he's prophesying before the first temple is destroyed. Is that right?
He's supposed to... He's 600. About 600 BC.
I assume like he lives through the first destruction, but he's talking about like there's going to be he's prophesying that the temple's going to be destroyed.
But he's prophesying that Jerusalem,
the Babylonians, but he means the Babylonians, right?
Or the Assyrians.
Well, yeah, but ultimately, yeah, the Assyrians and then the Babylonians, but then the Messiah will come like 600 years later. Like, is that? Okay.
Yeah. And then he's prophesying that then
he must have prophesied that the temple will be rebuilt. So he supposedly prophesied the second temple and that the second temple will be destroyed. So the temple will be destroyed twice. So
he doesn't make any mention of the destruction.
Lehi doesn't predict, the temple's going to be destroyed twice. You know, you might think, how could it be destroyed twice? There's going to be a second temple.
No.
So
really, in First Nephi, really, I mean, who knows what was in the book of Lehi? That's gone. You know, Martin Harris's wife, and but the interesting thing, though, I as far as I can recall off the top of my head, he mentions only the invasion, the sacking of Jerusalem. Yeah, the destruction of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Not the specifics.
Right.
And then
that orients me. I don't really. There's some incoherencies in what I'm hearing, but all right. From him, I mean,
8th century BC.
The thing that's interesting so far about this, I'm going to say, like, he doesn't know. I don't know how much he realizes he's getting right, because it's like, yeah, there is something to say for that. The canon that we know as the Old Testament was fairly late. People who think, this started with Moses.
It was written for the exact reason that he's explaining, right? Is that the religious elite want people to like be more obedient to them. And so they've invented all these stories to justify their, authority, essentially. So that's absolutely true.
I mean, the details
he's describing Mormonism as well, right? Like the Mormon scriptures are the same thing. But anyway,
I mean, details about like the Babylonian captivity and things like that, he's getting from a very Mormon perspective, and the text basically that now we know aren't exactly true. But I mean, he's getting there. He's actually getting to some place, especially when he talks about. This is what I think they'll be surprised if they ever see this, which I doubt. Maybe. Is that talking about pre-Christ Christianity, pre-Christianity Christ, I should say.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It is actually kind of an interesting subject, kind of right up your alley, I think, is that talking about, and the Ascension of Isaiah particularly, it's like, there is something to say for this. The ideas that end up in the Ascension of Isaiah, they didn't pop out of nowhere.
That's right.
When it came to be,
well, it's already in Paul, right? Like Paul's talking about the pre-existence of Jesus multiple times across his authentic letters. He says that the rock that the Jews followed around in the wilderness was Christ, right? Like, so Jesus was already there, like in the wilderness during the time of Moses. So, and he mentions Jesus is the God's agent of creation, like Jesus is the one who created everything, and. He talks about the pre-existence of Jesus in Philippians 2, where like he says, Jesus was in the form of God, but decided not to be equal, try to claim to be equal to God and so on. And then he came and then took on a body, God manufactured a body for him and so on. So like pre-existence of Jesus is baked in, it's fundamental, it's canonical to standard Christianity.
But of course,
there's a lot of scholarship on this too lately. Like there was a trend for about like 50 years in the 20th century to try and downplay this. I'm not entirely sure of the historical reason why scholars tried to do this, but they tried to claim that high Christology was late and that it started with low Christology. Now, this might have had something to do with the high Christology was problematic for historicity, and to defend historicity, you've got to claim a low Christology that evolves later into high Christology. But all the leading studies, there's been like 10 of them at least in the last 10 years, have all come completely down. These are peer-reviewed major scholar studies have come down. No, high Christology is right out of the gate. Like there was never a low Christology. It was high Christology from the beginning. And I agree with that. And I pointed that out in my book as well. But since I published, there's been like a zillion more studies. So my new book that's coming out this year, which is the sequel to On the Historicity of Jesus, is going to cite that literature. So it's going to be in there. What I was saying and what these other scholars are saying has now been backed up so thoroughly. Like it's been replicated so many times, multiply verified. So yeah, early high Christology baked in. It's a fact. Low Christology was a modern scholarly invention. It does not come out of the text at all.
Cool. Let's do it.
Okay. We think around that time. This shows, so he would have preached before the brass plates were yoinked. If you can see there, the yoinking takes place right around 600.
Technical word, yoink.
It is. It's Yiddish.
It's very good.
It's Yiddish. The Israelites are sharing this common tradition. Then they come to about 6, and then there's this schism that starts to happen. People are the Messiah or not the Messiah, or Deuteronomy or not Deuteronomy. All these kind of reforms are going on, and the Lord says, "Get out, get it out, get the plain and precious things out." So this is where it breaks off, and the Nephites steal away the plain and precious things. Then, after a century later, is the Old Testament kind of officially canonized, we think. It's obviously drawn from things that are ancient or whatever, but that's when it's really kind of compiled and put together. So the Book of Mormon, the brass plates that were taken by Lehi predate the Old Testament.
Right.
Okay.
Let me say that again.
I mean, they would have to be, right? I mean,
exactly. No, I understand that that's what they have to claim, right? That's
right.
Yeah. This is internally coherent. It makes sense that's what they have to. That's what Joseph Smith had to claim. So
I mean, if Lehi really did leave 600 BCE and come to America with the brass plates, which he got by sending his sons basically to steal it from the captain of the guard of Jerusalem, basically, a man named Laban. And so, so obviously,
sounds like a great D&D tabletop game that we're dealing with here. Okay.
The brass plates predate, they're a purer form of the Old Testament. The Old Testament was then later changed by these scribes and Deuteronomists. So Isaiah and his entourage, they go to Bethlehem, this little town, Bethlehem, which was the home city of Jesse. Okay, the father of David. So they go to Bethlehem and they're chilling in Bethlehem. And it's interesting because the prophecy that the Messiah will be born in Bethlehem comes from Isaiah. He says, in Bethlehem will the Messiah come forth, and that comes from him. Though he's in Bethlehem.
This is so
it's kind of
intriguing.
Neat. So okay. So then he has his little entourage. So what happens is he's in the court of the king. You read this in the Ascension of Isaiah, and he says, "Oh my gosh, I'm getting a vision." And apparently, right in front of everybody, he looks up in the heavens and he receives some kind of vision, some kind of ascension. Okay, and if you read it with your temple ears on, it's 100 times more interesting. But even if you don't, let's say you don't, okay, and you're just reading it to, what does he say just on the first layer? All right, I suggest everybody who's been endowed, please go read the Ascension of Isaiah. It's open source. Go Google it. You can read it. Okay.
Okay.
And it's.
I don't know if you consider yourself endowed, Richard, but if you have temple ears.
Right. It's problematic in the sense that it's the same problem of translation, right? So he's talking about it's open source. Yeah, a translation is open source. And there's more than one that's probably open source. There are also translations. Well, I guess there hasn't really. Well, there actually been like some more recent English translations. The most recent translation is in Italian, not in English. But that's based on the best critical analysis of the disagreeing text, because we actually have multiple disagreeing manuscripts of the Ascension of Isaiah. So the Norelli edition is the one that people always refer to, and he gives an Italian translation of it, and that is the most recent, most authoritative modern language translation. It's just in Italian, so I'm sure.
Now, my understanding,
correct?
Correct me if I'm wrong, though. Pretty much all indications point to that. At least at one point, the document that was translated into modern language was an ancient form of Ethiopian, and it is from Ethiopia. Is that right?
The bulk of it. So obviously, it started in Greek. It might go back to pre-Greek. There's debates as to that. But what we have a fragment. We have actually multiple independent fragments that are Greek from the early Greek, but they're just pieces. The only complete text is, like you said, Ethiopic. We have semi-complete texts from Latin and Slavonic. And so so you have to like look at all of these disparate translations because we don't have the original Greek, just a little section of it. And also you have the problem that there's really two different, completely unrelated stories. There's the martyrdom of Isaiah and the Ascension of Isaiah. That when people talk about the Ascension of Isaiah, they usually mean the merger of these two books, but really we shouldn't do that because they're actually clearly separate. They were never originally merged together. And then whoever merged them together started editing it to make them agree with each other, like reference each other. But we have versions that don't have that editing. So we know they predate, like the separation predates the modern. Anyway, it's a mess. Like the Ascension of Isaiah text is a mess. And even if you solve the mess of the original language issue, there are divergent English translations that it's like you have to ask, like, why are you translating this differently than this other person? Well, it's like, well, okay, well, are they getting it from the Slavonic or the Latin or the Ethiopic? Do you read Ethiopic? Can you like go behind the text and figure that out? I can't. I don't know Ethiopic, so I have to like rely on scholars like Norelli who write commentaries on the Ethiopic text, right? And like even the Ethiopic, there's multiple manuscripts, right? Like so anyway, it's there are problems, there are issues here, and there's not really a good, like there's not a really excellent English edition that I could recommend people to go look at. Like I would say the Norelli edition is the definitive one so far, but it's in Italian, so like that's just not accessible to most people.
How many scholars would you say, just from a consensus standpoint, how strong would you say the consensus is among biblical scholars that the Ascension of Isaiah was written by the prophet Isaiah or anyone contemporary to Isaiah?
I'm pretty sure zero. I think.
Oh wow.
Well, I say zero. I mean, obviously, we have to include these Mormon scholars, I guess, who think that it's not. But I guess there might be some fringe folks. But no.
Are you talking about these Mormon scholars right here?
I don't know. I don't know if they're making this up or if they're relying on someone else. I have no idea.
Yeah.
No, certainly, like there's no like the mainstream consensus overwhelmingly is that it's an apocryphal text that was composed. The general view is the earliest version of it, or version of half of it, I should say, is 1st century AD. But even that, there's like uncertainty. Like they say, like the version of the text we have, but they don't commit to when it was written because there's not really any clues inside the text itself as to when it was written. So it could be earlier than 1st century AD. Okay. But the evidence that, like, as far as like the text form that we have clearly is Romano-Hellenic. So it comes from roughly 1st BC, 1st AD for sure. And then the text that we actually have, the manuscripts, the completed text that's like merges these documents and edits them, etc. That's 2nd century. So like most scholars say early 2nd century on that. But they don't mean that that's when it was written. They mean that's when the edition that we have was compiled and edited. But trying to get behind that edition, like what did it look like before that? There's a lot of scholarly discussion and stuff like that. But the idea is generally late 1st century to early 2nd century is where most scholars land on that. But generally, like the evidence is weak enough that you can't be confident that it doesn't date earlier. But I think that the consensus is that it's late 1st, early 2nd century.
So this is the interesting thing about that. Okay, so that basically puts it roughly contemporary to the drafting of the Gospels we know as the Gospels.
Absolutely, and especially with the modern dating. So like the mainstream view on the dating of the Gospels now, like now, is like Mark late 70s, and then Luke like 115-ish, and John like 120s or 130s. So we're talking about the canon of the four. We're looking at 70 to 130 AD. That's exactly when the Ascension of Isaiah was written. So it's a parallel text. It's being composed, seems probably by a sect that is not the same sect that's writing our Gospels, but is a sect that got kicked out essentially, and doesn't get represented in either our version or Marcian's, which Marcian's was the original New Testament, which we don't get to see. Our New Testament is the propagandistic response New Testament. It was like the New Testament that they invented to combat Marcian's version. So it's not even the original New Testament. It's a political reinvention of the New Testament. But even Marcian's version didn't have the Ascension of Isaiah. So that whoever's writing the Ascension of Isaiah is so radical that even Marcian doesn't like truck with them, right? So so this is some other like wing of Christianity that we hear virtually nothing about. But you're right. It's written roughly in that exact same period when the Gospels that we talk about as the canonical Gospels were written.
And another one that's interesting about that, before we go on, that I was like, again, I didn't know about this. I didn't notice it. I'd read it because I'd read the Bible when I was Mormon, and I've read it since then. Is that there's inside the Bible, there's another little clue that may connect these. We don't know, but may connect these together. And that is from, isn't it the first epistle of John that mentions what of those who believe that Christ has not come in the flesh, right?
Yeah.
And so that basically this is known as the docetist idea, if I'm not wrong, because
you're right as to what the view is. But keep going. I have my own opinions, but yeah, go on.
Okay, so docetism is as I understand it, from my unlearned opinion, although I don't have a PhD, so technically I'm more qualified than you, according to Jonah Barnes. Is that because I'm the pure mouthpiece, unadulterated?
Right. Yeah. That's right.
Is that the docetic view is basically that no human beings could kill God, and so Jesus must have projected his image like a hologram almost to the earth so that it could be crucified in a form that people could see. And then
I haven't heard this version of it, but so it's interesting that you frame it that way. That would be a very like modern Orthodox Christian way of doing it, right? And it's so the reason I say that is because you're working from the assumption of Trinitarianism, the idea that Jesus actually is God, right? There's no evidence that anybody thought that until maybe Tertullian. Even Tertullian's vague, and that's late 2nd century, and it doesn't become like canon. It doesn't become like the actual belief until Nicaea, right? Council of Nicaea 325, right? So that's late. But the entire New Testament, the Jesus is God is not in the New Testament. I know a lot of people try to pull it out of the Gospel of John, but they're not looking at the Greek. They don't understand the Jewish context of John, which is emanation theory. But we get that in Philo and so on. But it's already in Paul. But it's very clear that Jesus is a created being, but he's created out of God. So like God has all these properties. So if you look at like John 1, the Gospel, right? The Gospel of John. And people talk about, oh yeah, look, it says Jesus is God. No, it's past tense. Go look at it. And if you look at the translations, they correctly translate the Greek, which is in past tense, that Jesus was God. Meaning when Jesus shows up to talk to John the Baptist, he's no longer God. He's separate, right? It's a past tense. And so people forget this. And there are other aspects of like John where people try to pull verses out of context. But when you look at the Greek, they don't really mean those things. Like an example is that in the Doubting Thomas scene, I think it's Thomas says, "My God, my Lord, my God," and so look, it's declaring Jesus is the same. I was like, well, but when you say "my God," are you telling the person across from you that they're God? Right? That's not how no. You're it's an exclamation, "My God!" Right? I'm seeing the presence of God in what I'm seeing. I'm not saying that what I'm looking at is God. Right? We get this when we see it in English, but in Greek it's the same. So. And in fact, the Greek it's my Lord and my God. And the way it's structured, and it's not in the vocative. So he's not addressing Jesus as God. It's nominative. So it's a expression of I'm reacting to the presence of God. Now that actually makes sense especially in John, he has the I am. There's the reference to the I am thing. which in context people would understand, like Jews would understand that that's a reference to the Metatron, which is that when Moses, I almost said Joseph Smith, when Moses talks to the burning bush, by the time the Gospel of John is being written, its standard view of Jews is that was not God, that was the Metatron, which is a specific angel that God assigns to be God's presence. So that angel is representing God in the lower world. God speaks through that angel, but that angel is not identical to God. But the thing is, like, that's the I am, right? That's the Metatron. Anyway. So Jesus is claiming to be the Metatron in John, right? And that's totally makes sense within the context of Judaism at the time. So anyway, the big digression on that. But we get this already in Paul, the idea that Jesus he's separate from God, but he's pulled out of God. So like the idea of the Logos. Like once in the beginning, there was just God and all things were in him. And the Logos is the word, the reason, the fundamental law of the universe, whatever. He pulls that out of himself and creates it and imbues it into an angel, the greatest angel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which
in Mormon theology is Jehovah, is Yahweh. In Mormon theology, the Spirit of the Lord in that context, as he appears to Nephi, which is interesting that he's referred to that, and to others in the Book of Mormon, is Jesus in his antenatal form, in his premortal form, as Yahweh. So,
Right, and in Paul, it's the rock that people are following in the wandering desert with Moses. That's Jesus. That was a manifestation of Jesus. And so Jesus exists from the beginning of time. He's the first thing created, and that's explicit in Colossians. And that's obviously a forgery, but it comes from the same school of thought, which is the idea that the first thing that God made was Jesus. So Jesus is made, but then God assigns him a lot of authority and abilities. So like when Jesus goes and acts in the place of God, that's not saying that he is God. It's saying that God assigned him these authorities, these rights, and these powers. And anyway, so the point being is that like this idea of them being the same. So when the usual view of scholars is about docetism, is about a belief before the idea that Jesus is identical to God, because that comes later. It's still in this sphere where all the Christians were arguing with each other, all of them, including the Marcionites and the anti-Marcionites and the ones that wrote the New Testament and the ones that compiled the New Testament for us and all that. All these folks are not Trinitarians. They are subordinationists. Jesus is a created being that is assigned roles of God. So the Docetist is that still, even as like the supreme archangel who's imbued with the divine attributes, he can't die, right? Like it seems absurd that he should die. And by the way, this is the modern scholarly construct. So I'm spoiler alert there. And the idea is that therefore he must project a phantom or send like a little mannequin that pretends to be him to die, right? Like, and so that this is all this Docetism is based on these ideas. Now here's the thing is when I wrote on the historicity of Jesus and I did all of this research for this, I was side-eyeing Docetism. I was like, I'm not seeing this in the text. I don't know where scholars are getting this. So I write briefly about it where I mention my doubts, but I don't build anything out of it very much. But in my new book, I have a whole chapter. I say, no, Docetism is bullshit. It didn't exist. It's a completely modern construct.
Really? Wow.
And I'm not alone in this. I'm not alone in this because by the time I'm writing this book this year, like 2024, last year, there's several other scholars that come out, like whole anthologies, and like it's kind of like a movement now. A lot of scholars are saying the same thing I am, that Docetism is a modern construct. It never existed. We had it all wrong. We're misinterpreting the text, etc. And so I have this whole chapter on this as explaining, like I was even fooled in Jesus from Outer Space. I was just now working that we're going to come out with a reprint, and I was thinking like, God, that sentence. There's a sentence in there that I no longer agree with because now that I've researched this, like, oh my God, I totally fell for the modern construct, thinking that these guys are telling me the truth and we're like talking about what the text says. And I went and checked the text and it doesn't say those things. And this idea, like for instance, the switcheroo, the idea that this is another Docetist idea, even though it doesn't connect to the other Docetist idea, which is that Jesus tricked someone else to be crucified and runs away. And Simon of Cyrene usually is like, oh, they just fooled, like they did a little swap and somehow they got confused and crucified Simon of Cyrene. That is not true.
That's right.
So there's, I think, Irenaeus there's a polemicist who claims this of Basilides, but we have tons of other references to Basilides and descriptions of Basilides that absolutely refute this. So like there's basically Irenaeus was lying. Basilides never said this. No one ever said this. It was basically it's kind of like saying that Mary had sex with a Roman soldier, and that the Christians were confusing Parthenos with Pantheros because a lot of Roman soldiers called themselves Panther because they were cool, right? And that's actually true. By the way. We have actual inscriptions of Roman soldiers who called themselves Panther. But nice. Pantheros and Parthenos look similar, etc. So the Jews, and we have this in Celsus, so it's already in the 2nd century. Jews were making fun of Christians about this, like, oh, you confused Parthenos with Pantheros. Really, Mary had stripped by a Roman soldier, etc. But it's the same kind of polemic. Obviously, that's not true. That's not what happened. You could talk about what did happen, and it's just as embarrassing. But anyway, it's the confusion of the word and the abuse of the context of the original prophecy. And yeah, Christians abuse the Bible. That's absolutely true. But the Jewish polemic is false. Like there's no way that didn't happen. Like there's no true story where Mary had sex with a Roman soldier named Panther. No, that's just a polemic that they made up. But this is just like what Irenaeus is saying about Basilides. He completely made this up. Basilides never said this. It's just a polemic. It's just a bullshit story. It's Haitians eat your pets. It's exactly that kind of thing, right? This is something he made up that isn't true. And so no one believed this. So even that version of docetism didn't exist. And so you go through text after text after text, you find the same thing. It's like docetism doesn't exist. It was never a thing. Okay. And so anyway, that I have a whole chapter in detail. I cite, quote, many other scholars who are agreeing with me on this. I'm not alone. And I go text by text by text through this. So if this is a change for me, it was more than I was. It was a stronger position than I had been before, but it's because I went and checked, and it fell apart when I checked. So
we change our opinions with new information, right? Yeah, intellectual honesty. So, but we can agree. I think. Okay, well, maybe we can. Maybe you tell me.
Let's dial back to where we started. Where were we on this? Yeah.
What is the scholarly consensus, would you say, or at least your opinion, or both, about the possibility that there is ever mention of Jesus in the Ascension of Isaiah as having an earthly ministry, born a babe in Bethlehem and so forth, versus this version of Jesus closer to Gnosticism or Valentinian or tradition there?
Well, okay, that's a false dichotomy, but
okay.
So most scholars think. So first of all, the text says this. So it has this elaborate, multi-layered, like ring structure where Isaiah is told what he's going to see, and then he sees it, and so you see the ring structure. And smack in the middle of this, there is kind of like a weird gospel tradition where Jesus is born by being teleported out of the womb of Mary, and he's killed it. I think it says by a king. Like I don't think Pontius Pilate is mentioned. So there's some sort of weird little pocket gospel in there. And most scholars, I think, just believe that was in the original. There have been several scholars, especially like the earlier ones who really did some of the earliest groundwork on this, doubt that. They think that that's an insertion because it doesn't fit the rest of the text. It's kind of incongruous. And I agree with them. And so in my analysis on the historicity of Jesus, I show this, that the pocket gospel doesn't fit the rest of it. It doesn't make any sense. It's obviously made up. Now, even the scholars who think that it's original agree it's weird, right? So is that a Gnostic text? Is it a Docetist text? But if Docetism didn't exist, so that becomes a non-starter as a hypothesis. So this is really important. Why we need to resolve that problem. But anyway, there's just disagreements as to what it's clearly non-canonical. It's some sort of non-canonical historical Jesus, son of Mary story. But the question of where did that come from? What sect did it belong to? What did other people think about it? Like that is hotly debated in the field still today.
Cool. But definitely as an indicator of Jesus or the beloved being from some factor of Jewish angelology, very solid. I mean, it existed at this time period, right?
So, okay, yeah, there's two levels to that statement.
Oh man.
So Philo of Alexandria, who's writing before Christianity, just before, like contemporary with, like 20s to 40s, so that's when he's writing AD. Right. Now I'll set aside the name, put that aside for a minute. He lists like 10. He comes up with this angel. What comes up? He's describing an angel that clearly already exists in Jewish angelology. He didn't invent it. He's just relating lore in Jewish angelology, which is this logos. The logos. He doesn't use the word Metatron, but he describes it in the same terms. It's high priest of God's celestial temple. It's the one who atones for the sins of humanity in that celestial temple. He's also the paraclete. He's all these other things that there's basically 10 attributes that this angel has, and all of them were assigned to Jesus. I think 7 of them are in Paul already. Hebrews adds 1, and then John adds 2 more. So clearly early Christians believed that Jesus was that angel. And so even if Jesus existed, they believed that. So they thought that he was this angel, became incarnate. So the historicists would say that this preacher going around was either claiming to be this angel or his followers after claimed it, right? Like to try and justify his death and stuff. Oh, he was really this incarnated angel and he came to us in a dream and told us everything. Just like other gods had done. By the way, Romulus is one of these gods where he was a pre-existent god named Quirinus, came down, became incarnate through a woman vagina, and then went around and got killed, and then came back and says, yes, I came down to like teach you all this stuff. So the idea of this, like an incarnated celestial being, made sense. Like now Romulus is a fictional person, so it's not mythical, but you could make this claim about a real person. So it's entirely compatible with a historical Jesus. It's just a question of, did Jesus claim this? Did someone after? But so that's definitely the case. So there was an angel that the earliest Christians, we see it already in Paul, thought Jesus was this angel incarnated. Absolutely true. Now you can debate as to whether that angel was already named Jesus, and I think the evidence is really strong that it was. It had many names. So Philo says it's an angel of many names, and I think one of those names is Jesus. We could do a whole show on that, but there's a lot of evidence supporting that I talk about on the historicity of Jesus and so on. But whether you agree with the name being already Jesus or not, definitely the angel was being attributed to Jesus for sure. There's
the
no doubt about
logos
that.
prior to John 1:1 never being
absolutely
written.
Yeah. So John, that's not the first time we hear of this. Paul doesn't use the word logos, but he describes attributes of the angel that fit the logos angel that Philo describes exactly. So definitely Paul just happened to never use the word, but I'll bet if you could go back and talk to him, he'd say, oh yeah, of course, Jesus was the logos. I think readily he would say that because he would understand the Jewish angelological context, because he references it multiple times. So he certainly knew it. Right. And there's nothing un-Jewish about this, by the way. This is actually completely sensible in the Jewish context.
Cool. So we're definitely still in this realm of could be, not. Could be.
That's right.
Could be,
it's kind of crazy. But anyways, he goes, he does this ascension. An angel gives him a tour, a guided tour. It gives him kind of a guided tour of heaven. And in it, he sees some things that are very controversial. He says, I see a virgin, and she'll conceive a son, and that son will be the Son of God, and that Son of God will come down on earth. He will suffer at the hands of lawless, wicked men. He will be crucified on a tree.
Okay.
Now, we know that story. That doesn't seem unremarkable. But consider that you're talking to those very people. You're talking to the priests, the lawless men, and you're saying someday you are going to murder God. You people are going to be responsible for murdering God.
Okay?
You read First Nephi 11.
He's really making a hash of this. Okay, so first of all, even in the completed, fully edited, modified text, it doesn't say what he just said. So in no way does Isaiah, when the angel takes Isaiah up in a tour of heaven, there's no reference to the virgin. There's no reference to the birth of Jesus. That birth stuff is in that weird gospel that's stuck in the middle that's never referenced anywhere else in the text, which is why we think that that's not originally there. So he didn't get that information. That stuff is in that weird pocket gospel. The second part of it is that the other odd aspect of this is that the Jesus in the Ascension of Isaiah is not God. He's very clearly indicated, like, God is talking about and to this entity. This entity is a high-ranking angel, like the highest-ranking angel for sure, and a representative of God and all of that. But he's not identical to God. So the idea that they're killing him, that's not what would be going on there. Finally, the text says that this is a secret that Isaiah never told anyone. Right. So like this is like a secret document. So in no way did Isaiah came back and said, you're going to kill God. Like, oh my God, this is terrible. It's like, no, it was a secret. He was instructed not to tell anyone. And so it was like some sort of like, you rolled it up in a scroll and buried it or something. I don't know how we're supposed to figure out how it happened. It's like the ending of Mark where the women ran away and never told anyone. And you have to like, how does Mark know what happened? Like, they didn't tell anyone. But that's what the Ascension of Isaiah says, is like he was instructed not to tell anyone, and he didn't. It was a secret. Right. And so there's a lot of other issues there, but that's the kind of where he's really playing fast and loose with what he's gotten out of the text. It's like someone who's like watching Apocalypse Now and completely getting wrong what the entire point of the movie is.
So it's like, man, the Korean War was wild, man.
The Korean War was wild, yes. Oh, and yes, Kilgore, that's the greatest guy. Clearly an excellent American hero. Yeah, okay.
The parallels are like kind of crazy. You're reading Isaiah's vision from the Ascension of Isaiah, and you read it parallel to Nephi's vision of the Tree of Life. He gets a temple guided tour, right, of his vision. Okay. And I've highlighted here in my book, in this table, some of the correspondences. And you see that they start off talking about the only begotten, the Son of the Eternal Father. Sonship was a very controversial thing that was not welcome talk, to say that God will have a son and that the Messiah will be the son. The Spirit of the Lord resembles a man. It looks just like a man. It isn't a cloud. It looks like a man. He'll be the son in this world. He'll descend from heaven.
So, yeah,
he'll go forth.
Neither of those things were weird. Son of God was a common expression in Judaism. The idea that God would have sons, appointed sons, like they're not biological. Like God doesn't go on and have sex with women and create sons in that sense. But the Son of God, like referring to the Jews as the sons of God, referring to David as the Son of God, like this is all Jewish language. There's nothing weird about it. And the what was the other thing he said just after that? He was talking about the Son of God, and then the other weird, supposedly, the Messiah aspect of it. None of that is weird. So he's claiming that these things are weird, and in context, they actually make sense. They're actually not as weird as he's talking about.
Cool.
The world will stretch forth their hand against the Son. They'll take him and they'll raise him up. The lawless men, the wicked men. It follows, the virgin will conceive. The virgin will be in Nazareth. Once is Bethlehem, once is Nazareth. You follow these parallels, tick, 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 and you almost start to think, did Nephi get the exact same ascension vision as Isaiah? And I said, I don't get, is it like on a DVD? Like, can you replay?
Yeah.
Like Isaiah sees this vision and then they stop, rewind, and then a century later, they give it to Nephi? Like, how does this happen? And Dave gave me this kind of 2x4 up the side of the head and he goes, unless it was a temple ordinance. And I'm like, oh, duh, of course it's a temple ordinance. Like, duh. Like, yes, of course. It's some kind of a rite that an angel is walking Isaiah through and walking Nephi through. If you look at the reaction of the angel in 1 Nephi 11, so he's given this tour and he says, the angel's like, heard this crazy stuff from your dad, right? And Nephi's like, yeah. And the angel's like, so what do you think about that? And Nephi's like, I believe it. It's like, you believe all of it? And Nephi's like, yeah, I do. And the angel's like, oh, and in verse 6, he says, he freaks out. The angel's like, Hosanna to the Lord, the most high God, for he is God over all the earth, yea, even above all. And blessed art thou, Nephi, because thou believest in the Son of the most high God, the sonship, the begottenness, that the Messiah is the Son of God. This was something that you're not allowed to talk about. Isaiah saw the exact same thing, and it was he's going to be the son of the Virgin. And then the Spirit goes on. It says the virgin's going to give birth. The virgin is in Nazareth. He's going to go forth. He's going to have 12 disciples, and follows Isaiah's vision almost perfectly. It's almost like the question that this was supposed to answer. It's almost like there's this terrible loss, this apostasy going on, and people are fighting against that idea, the sonship of the Messiah. And the angel has found someone who believes it. And he's just relieved that this doctrine will be preserved. That Nephi says, yeah, I believe that. And the angel's like, oh, thank goodness somebody believes this, because it's being lost.
So
it's not been lost. It's been destroyed. This is the characteristic ideology of the Deuteronomic reformers is Yahweh aloneism.
All right.
And you can tell they're
I get it. I see why they would find this attractive, because they're literally going to gullibly believe that this was actually a text written by Isaiah in 600-ish BC. So, yeah, sure. If you believe that it's true, then you can say, "Oh, look, this proves that everything that we were saying was true all along, and therefore our whole history and made up scriptures must be true too." I see why they would appeal to this, why that would make sense. I am curious though about what their opinions would be of all the weird things that are in there, like the king that killed Jesus, or the teleportation out of the womb thing. There's some weird stuff in there. But I guess it makes sense, like with Mormonism, with their astrotheology aspects, with the idea of planets and worlds beyond and all of that, because that's part of Ascension of Isaiah too. When Jesus resurrects or survives his death or whatever, he becomes a brilliant like star that like basically announces to everyone, and then all the Satan and all the other celestial beings are like shocked. Oh my God, we didn't know that it was Jesus the whole time. Wow. Maybe
now you touch on something there that I don't think that they did touch. They don't touch. No, I'll tell you right now, because I watched the whole thing. They don't touch on this at all. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
There's this idea that you talked about it. This is like I mean, maybe this is just a normal thing to talk about in New Testament scholarship, but is this archons of this age, right? And this idea that the ones who are deciding that this being, we'll call Jesus the beloved, the Logos, whatever he is, has to die, are never Pontius Pilate until the Gospels that we know of as the Gospels.
Right. Yeah.
But the archons of this age are one interpretation that seems plausible is this basically like the spirits, the humors, or the spiritual rulers over this earth, like maybe like the angels, the demons or daemons who are cast from heaven in the war in heaven or something like that, right? They're not necessarily earthly principalities with earthly princes, and certainly not Roman prefects or Roman governors, right?
Yeah. And even so, like that pocket gospel that has him killed by quote unquote the king, which doesn't make any sense really, of Pontius Pilate and whatnot. But that's the pocket gospel. When you look at the ring structure around it, it seems pretty plain it seems pretty clear that the angel was showing Isaiah that it was the demons battling each other in the firmament that would be like it was Satan and his agents that killed Jesus.
Right.
Someone took that piece out and put in this weird apocryphal gospel instead. And there are other hints of this too, that the idea that clearly the original vision had this idea that Satan and his demons are the ones who killed Jesus, not knowing who he was, because he hides himself with, he keeps assuming different bodies as he goes down different levels of heaven, tricking people into thinking that he's not the particular entity that he is. And then ultimately fools them into killing him, and then they're surprised when he like pops back and he's super glorious and stuff. Aha! I tricked you, and yada yada. And that's the narrative, right? But throwing this little pocket gospel in there, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense anymore. And somehow now Satan has nothing to do with any of it. And like, well, what was the whole point of mentioning Satan and his demons? And why did he say they are the ones who killed Jesus when clearly it was this king unnamed king that you're gonna like. Anyway, so there's aspects of this that are confusing and difficult unless you start to realize there's a redaction history here that you have to sort of explain. And he even mentions that earlier. So it was multiple authors. He said multiple authors. Yeah, that's right. Like, and so they're doctoring the text, and so the text does not say what it originally said, which kind of contradicts what he's arguing now. That supposedly this comes from Isaiah, but it's multiple authors now. Like, how could it be both? Like, how could it be this lost text of Isaiah that was written in 600 BC, therefore vindicating all of Mormonism, but it's also written by multiple different authors?
Right. Right.
So I don't know how he's resolving that.
As it goes on, I'll spare you the rest. But basically, the guy that they're talking to there, the guy with the amazing haircut, David Butler, I believe. He basically, I think he's more behind most of this than I don't know that for sure. But he's like a science fiction author, as I understand it, and he's like does a lot of armchair historian stuff. I don't know if he has any degrees at all. I doubt it. But in any of this. But the interesting thing about it is they're kind of looking at this from this. Where was I going with that crap? That the Ascension of Isaiah. Right. That it was compiled Frankenstein. He calls it a Frankenstein's monster. Basically, he doesn't say the monster, but he says it's Frankenstein. But you should say Frankenstein's monster.
Okay, yeah. And I use the same metaphor, but I say Frankenstein's monster because
you've read you've read Mary Shelley. Right.
Yeah. So continue. Yeah.
But he basically is making he interjects. David Butler interjects. He's like, okay, you can say how old and what the narration, what the origin of the script on the parchment or whatever is, but you can't. But the age of the ideas is a little more difficult. And how far back do those go into antiquity? Do they predate Christianity? And I look at them like, number one, you don't know much about that, neither do we, but you're not far off on saying that, yeah, that's an idea. You know, the idea of Jesus being generated, going back to before the gospel writers, before John the Baptist, before Jesus, before, all this, going back to Philo, going back to earlier than Philo, it's there. There's a plausibility there that makes Jesus mythicism compelling. And the thing that's interesting about this, I had this conversation, as I said, on the Mary Mythmas episode with Derek Lambert, where we talked about you. And
and this is just a month ago we're talking?
Yep, just a few weeks ago. And he said, and I said, here's the thing about mythicism, because of course he doesn't consider himself mythicist. He considers himself less mythicist than ever. You know that.
He's a minimal historicist. Which is called a minimalist. So he's a New Testament, a Jesus minimalist. And he's not alone. There are a lot of scholars who would claim that.
Sure. And I said, here's the thing, because he used to follow mythicism. He started Myth Vision really about mythicism. And now it's this huge podcast. And with Bob Price at the beginning, now he's gone. But the interesting thing about it, I said, here's what's interesting to me about Jesus mythicism. It's not that I think for sure Jesus didn't exist. I said even Richard Carrier doesn't believe that, as far as I can understand. And I said, but here's the thing that's beautiful about Jesus mythicism is it makes me do research into early Christianity that I would have totally overlooked looking at it from the traditional narrative. And it's so much more interesting going into all of these other things,
that's been my experience as well. Yeah. Like when I did this research project, like I learned so much more when I was trying to like actually get behind where do all these assumptions come from? Where do all these claims come from? And then you read the original texts, you read some of the actual scholarship that's written on it. It's not what you were told. And it's like, it's different. And so you start to see things differently. And you learn a lot more about how weird and interesting ancient cosmology was, like ancient Jewish angelology, demonology. The way they saw the world is so different from how we just assume the way they saw the world, and then that changes things, right? And in the political context and all of this, and that's it, the example I gave earlier of docetism, like how, like I was just buying the party line of what this literature said until I started researching it. It was like, well, no, that falls apart. Things are weirder, even weirder than they claim. So yeah, I agree. I think mythicism is valuable at the very least for that reason. And I'll say like what Derek's done with his channel is like he's stuck on theme, which is which is like, regardless of whether Jesus is wholly a myth or not, clearly there's a lot of mythology, right? Like even if it's a historical Jesus, he's been heavily mythologized, and you still need to understand that mythologization. So even if you're a hardcore historicist, you still need to study how and why did Jesus get mythologized in the ways that he was. And I think, you know, Derek's show is built out of that, like most of what he's doing. And he's getting a lot of like great scholars, like Corrente recently. He had she's an Italian scholar who did the Dying and Rising God stuff lately. Even got her, I think Paola Corrente, and got her on. That's a great get, right? Like not hardly anybody's like talking to these scholars doing this. These are like peer-reviewed scholars, recent, doing stuff on this. So I think his channel's like unparalleled. Like I don't think anybody's doing fully what he's doing. And so yeah, like it's not hinging on the mythicism angle. It's mythology, and he's doing really good work with that. So definitely I'm behind that.
Yeah. Cool. I haven't read Key to the Keystone yet, and we don't have time to keep going with this.
I'm not gonna. Yeah.
Well, I'll give it a quick review, and I'll let you know. Maybe we'll talk again about it in the future. I'll give you the rundown. But if you haven't, gentlemen, over there at Ward Radio, you got to do a good deep dive into Philo of Alexandria if you're loving this apocryphal shit, because Philo of Alexandria is the good shit. And then, sorry for swearing at you Mormons, but
good shit. Yeah, I like that.
It is the good shit, right? And then you get into the pseudo Clementines, and whoo-wee! This is the good shit.
Yeah. That's the heavy stuff there,
right?
Yeah, because it really gets weird once you get into the pseudo Clementines, I'll tell you.
Yep. And so, I mean, I'll tell you this. So anybody who says, there's Joe, first herald of the Church of Korihor. Those of you out there who don't know, we're a church for atheists. You can check us out at korihor.org. Why should the God believers have all the fun and all the tax breaks? And so but the interesting thing for me is that people say, Joe's always talking about this. I have this suspicion that Jesus was not a real person. I don't know it for sure, but I do think that it's plausible and interesting. And my friend Stephen Pinecker, who is a former evangelical turned atheist returned evangelical, says, last time he goes, you don't actually believe that, like the Richard Carrier stuff. And I'm like, no, I do. I know Richard Carrier. And he's like, oh, no. He goes, you realize that mythicism is the flat eartherism of New Testament scholarship.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I said, listen, I've heard it all, Steve. I've heard it all. And I said, here's the thing. I've talked to flat earthers, and you tell a flat earther you think the earth is round, they'll melt down on you. Did I do that just now when you told me that? I'm like, so there's got to be something to say for this. So, but the things that give me pause, when I heard the case for the gospel according to the Hebrews, that, we only have clips and pieces out of. And then I looked into it and I'm like, I don't buy that this is an actual gospel written in the time period of Jesus.
Right.
This looks to me like a redaction, maybe of Matthew, and something,
right.
or something.
Exactly right. Mm-hmm.
And so I'm looking at them, but then there are these scholars that really buy it. Is that it's some version of it. It's definitely an indication that there was this other narrative forming, and one where Jesus is not God, which is interesting to note. And it's one where Jesus is not even divine. They say he's not divine. And so so it's interesting. Then they take off on this whole different direction. And the reason why St. Jerome and all these other early church fathers say, no, there's no way. Not because the history is bad necessarily, but because the doctrine is bad for the church.
That's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So. fascinating stuff.
Yeah,
you guys.
Absolutely.
I want to thank today. I can't keep Richard Carrier up all night. It is way past his bedtime out there, and neither of us are young men anymore. So I just want to thank Dr. Richard Carrier for being on the show tonight.
I love it.
Richard.
Good.
Where can we find more information about you and about the upcoming audiobook?
That's right. All things me are at richardcarrier.info. So .info, just my name, .info. You'll find all my social media links there and my blog, which I blog regularly on ancient history, counter-apologetics, history of Christianity, and contemporary modern philosophy. And my books you can find there. I have courses. You can take online correspondence courses where you get 30 days of picking my brain on all the questions you had on the subject in both philosophy and history and counter-apologetics and critical thinking and all of the things. You can check it all out there. And that's the place to start. Like once you get involved there, I'm pretty much mostly Patreon supported. So I love people to get in and start, putting pledges in on Patreon and just backing my work so that I can have an ad-free blog that's available worldwide. So that matters, because that means I have stories to tell of people like in Saudi Arabia who can access my website and basically apostatize from Islam secretly. So the thing is, it matters to have a non-paywalled, critical thinking blog like that. It means that there are people all over the world who can access it who probably wouldn't get access otherwise. So the Patreon supporters are doing more than just paying my salary. They're helping me create content that is available and globally influential. I recommend folks come support me there. But either way, there's lots of ways to support me, including buying my books, including the audiobooks. And when the audiobook comes out, which is I have about 9 books now. They're all available on Audible. So you can go to Amazon, find, look me up and find all my books. You can find, if it's best if you go to my website, go to books. There's a link on the, one of the top things is get books on my website. You click through there. If you click the links through there, I get a commission in addition to royalties. And not only do I get a commission on whatever you buy, I get a commission on anything that's in your cart within 24 hours. So if you go and buy, a diamond ring and a lawnmower and a rare baseball, within 24 hours of clicking a link through my website to an Amazon page, I get a commission on everything in there. So that's another way to support my work. But anyway, when the Audible book comes out with Jesus from Outer Space, I will blog it and it'll show up on all my social media. So pick the social media thing you want to follow. I have an article that you can find on my blog called Guide to My Social Media. So you want to see what do I do? What am I doing on Twitter? What am I doing on Blue Sky, which I'm now on? What am I doing on Facebook, and so on? So you can find all of that information, everything you want to know, including people who want to check my credentials. If you know how to navigate a website, you can find my CV and everything else. So all things me are at richardcarrier.info.
Cool, man. Hey guys, thank you very much for being here again. Thank you to Richard. And I say we all take a vote, but my vote is on. We get Richard back in soon. So
I would
thank
love
you
that.
very much.
Yeah.
Cool. Until next time, fellowship, flash bright.